Emmett Walker stepped to the board, just a farm boy in dusty boots, while Ivy Kid smirked, and the professor laughed. Let's see if Alabama can do calculus, Whitaker mocked. But when Emmett solved the unsolvable problem step by step, the room fell silent. Hours later, his paper vanished, and his grade was marked as 0. The next thing he found was a threat, not from students but from the university itself. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The lecture hall in Hadley Hall carried more weight than just the years carved into its timber beams. Its arched ceilings echoed generations of whispers, and its oak-paneled walls stood like sentinels, guarding the legacy of a school that had molded senators, CEOs, and presidents. The incoming class of the Advanced Calculus Seminar, a seminar known more for exclusion than education, was seated with an air of entitlement only old money could afford. Every student there had either graduated from elite prep academies or bore surnames that echoed across skyscrapers and law firms. Then Emmett Walker walked in. He stepped through the threshold slowly, carefully, as though he could feel the air shift around him. The room didn't fall silent. It didn't need to. The tension was quieter than that. It was in the sideways glances, the synchronized eye rolls, and the small smirks that formed on faces too young to be that smug. His boots, still caked with a trace of dry Alabama clay, clunked against the polished marble flooring with an unmissable thud. His jeans, faded and patched at the knees, betrayed a life unfamiliar with valet service or five-star brunches. He carried a military green canvas backpack, torn at the seams, its zipper dragging. It didn't belong in this room, and neither did the boy carrying it. Emmett scanned the rows of students before finding a spot in the very front. He didn't sit there to make a statement. He sat there because he couldn't see the board too well from the back, and because that's where the learning happened. It was a habit carried from underfunded classrooms with flickering lights and broken HVAC systems. As he settled in, he pulled out a thick, weathered notebook, leather-bound, scuffed, and packed with his scribbled theories, taped corners, and memories of nights studying by the soft hum of a diesel generator on the farm. Behind him, a girl in a Cornell sweatshirt whispered, "He's sitting in Tyler Cohen's seat. Doesn't he know the front row's taken?" A boy chuckled beside her, flipping his monogrammed pen in his fingers. Probably thought it was first come, first serve, bless his heart. Up on the dais, Dr. Ronald Whitaker glanced at the seating chart. His brow furrowed as he squinted through his glasses and found Emmett's name. "Emmett Walker?" he asked, tone laced with polite disbelief. Emmett raised a hand slightly. "From Alabama?" Whitaker continued, like he was confirming a bad rumor. "Yes, sir," Emmett said, nodding, his voice quiet but steady. Whitaker smirked, shaking his head ever so slightly. "Well, let's hope the tractors down south run as efficiently as your derivatives, Mr. Walker." Laughter bloomed. Not loud, but enough. The kind that cuts sharp and lingers. Emmett didn't react. He'd heard worse. He'd seen grown men underestimate his father just because he wore overalls and worked with his hands. He knew the flavor of contempt, even when it was wrapped in academic charm. Class began. Dr. Whitaker launched into the opening lecture, a review of multivariable limits, chain rules, and the foundations of optimization theory. Equations filled the board in rapid succession. Students scribbled with Mont Blanc pens and typed notes on MacBooks, occasionally glancing toward Emmett, like he was a dog trying to walk upright. Emmett wrote furiously, flipping pages, cross-referencing notes. Unlike the others, he didn't scroll Reddit mid-lecture or doodle in the margins. He didn't have the privilege of laziness. His scholarship depended on his GPA staying above one slip, and he'd be sent back. Not just to a smaller campus, but back to a farm in Elkmont where opportunity wasn't a staircase, but a steel ladder with broken rungs. Whitaker paused, dropping his marker dramatically after filling the last line of a complex derivation. "This," he said, tapping the final equation, "is the root of nonlinear optimization under constraint. Any takers on how we derive this step by step?" The class stilled. Most students stared at the board like it was Greek. One girl shifted uncomfortably. A boy in the back looked like he might attempt it, then shrugged and kept typing notes. Whitaker smiled, as though proving a point. But then Emmett raised his hand. It wasn't cocky, it was calm, like someone offering to help move a heavy box because they'd done it before. The professor blinked. Laughter rippled lightly across the room. "Mr. Walker," Whitaker said, leaning forward, half in amusement, half in warning. Emmett nodded. "You want to walk us through this derivation?" "Yes, sir," Emmett said, adjusting his notebook. Whitaker chuckled, not cruelly, but not kindly either. It was the kind of laugh meant to put someone back in their place. I'm sure we could use some rural perspective, he said dryly. Go ahead. More laughter. Smirks. A phone raised briefly. Someone recording. Emmett stood, notebook in hand. His heart thudded. Not from fear. From clarity. From memory. He had seen this problem before. Not exactly like this, but close. In one of his father's old mechanics books. Except it was applied to fuel efficiency, not calculus. He had worked through something similar just last summer, under a flickering porch light, with chalk on a wooden board. He walked to the front of the room, took the marker from the ledge, and began writing. As he drew the first line, the laughter faded. Each step he wrote was precise. Every operation justified, each transformation elegantly transitioned into the next. His handwriting was rough, but his math was exact. The room quieted to a kind of stunned silence. One student stopped recording. Another leaned forward. Whitaker folded his arms, but said nothing. Emmett continued, layering partial derivatives, embedding the constraint, simplifying it algebraically, and reapplying the transformation rule. It wasn't flashy. It was just right. Exactly right. He stepped back, placed the marker down, and turned around. The board behind him showed the complete derivation. Flawless. Clean. Logical. The room was silent. Whitaker's jaw tightened. He nodded slowly. Well then. He didn't say correct. He didn't applaud.
But he didn't need to.
Everyone had seen what just happened. Emmett returned to his seat. He opened his notebook again. The rest of the lecture dragged forward, but the tone had shifted. He had walked in a stranger. Now they were watching him differently. Some with curiosity, others with hostility. But the whispers hadn't stopped. They'd only gotten quieter and deeper. When Emmett raised his hand to answer the first calculus question, the professor burst into laughter, not knowing what was coming. The silence that followed Emmett's unexpected flawless derivation didn't last long. By the time students filed out of the lecture hall, the energy had shifted from shock to entertainment. Those who had recorded the moment wasted no time trimming the footage into the version they wanted the world to see. The video that circulated through Hadley University's private group chats didn't show Emmett completing the proof. It didn't even show him writing on the board. Instead, it showed the first few seconds him standing, hesitating slightly as he gathered his thoughts, gripping the marker awkwardly. Someone added text over the clip. Farmer boy thinks he's a math genius. It spread with reckless speed, reshared by students who hadn't even bothered attending the lecture. The misleading clip reached dorm lounges, cafeterias, fraternity group chats, and even faculty inboxes within an hour. By sunset, Emmett Walker had become a joke. In the polished halls where privilege echoed louder than footstep, students watched the clip and laughed without restraint. Did you see the way he froze? A blonde boy in an emerald sweater cackled in the student center. A girl lounging on the leather sofa chimed in. My little cousin can do derivatives faster than that. She giggled, tossing her hair. Why is he even here? Who approved this? It's definitely that diversity push, her friend said, lowering her voice to a whisper that wasn't really a whisper. They probably needed someone different on the brochure. Just a few feet away, Emmett walked into the student center, his backpack slung over one shoulder. He didn't need to hear the words clearly. He recognized the cadence of mockery. His shoulders tensed reflexively, as though bracing against a blow he expected but wished he didn't see coming. He found an empty chair by the window, and sat, pulling out his notebook. If he pretended to focus, maybe he wouldn't have to face the stairs. But the sound of a familiar laugh, Dr. Whitaker's unmistakable chuckle, carried across the room. Emmett glanced up. Two faculty members stood near the coffee cart, watching the viral clip on a phone. One of them shook his head. I mean, really, Ron, you can't be surprised. The admissions office is pushing for these rural outreach programs. Whitaker sipped his espresso, his expression tinged with smug satisfaction. I don't fault the boy for trying, but clearly he was placed 2 levels above his capacity. They laughed together before dispersing, unaware or uncaring that Emmett sat within earshot. His chest tightened painfully, but he kept staring at his notebook, pretending the ink on the page wasn't blurring at the edges. Everything in him wanted to sink into the background, to disappear into the shadows of this institution that never wanted him in the first place. But running wasn't an option. His scholarship was his family's sacrifice, years of saving from numbers too small to save from. Worse than the laughter was the thought of disappointing his parents. They'd believed in him more than anyone in this building ever would. As he struggled to focus, a voice interrupted his spiral. "Hey, Emmett?" He looked up. Chloe Vance, the teaching assistant, stood beside him. Her expression caught somewhere between concern and hesitation. She was one of the few in the department known for fairness, a sharp contrast to the cold arrogance that seemed almost a requirement for faculty here. "Mind if I sit?" she asked. He nodded, trying not to shrink into himself. She slid into the chair across from him, setting her tote bag down. "Rough first day," she said softly. He let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "Guess that's one way to put it." Chloe studied him for a moment before saying, "I saw the full lecture. I saw what you actually did. And I saw what Whitaker didn't say." Emmett didn't respond, but his eyes flickered. "I also saw the video," she added. "It's not fair." He gave a dry, almost brittle laugh. "Fair doesn't really apply much to people like me around here." Chloe leaned forward. "Then we're going to make our own path." He raised an eyebrow. "We?" She hesitated. "Look, I noticed something during the lecture. The problem Whitaker wrote, he didn't derive it from the textbook. It came from somewhere else." "Like where?" Emmett asked, confused. She glanced around before lowering her voice. "He keeps a set of unpublished problems. Personal research. Stuff he uses to test students he doesn't trust." The words stung, even though Emmett had suspected something like that. "And he tested me. He wanted you to fail," she said quietly. He swallowed hard. Chloe reached into her bag and pulled out a faded blue notebook. Its edges were frayed, and a few pages were folded as if someone had pored over them obsessively. "These are the problems from his private set. I found them last semester when I was organizing his files. He said they were too complicated for undergraduates." She slid the notebook toward him. "But you solved one today. Without preparation." Emmett stared at the notebook like it was a door he didn't know existed. One he wasn't supposed to open. "You should look at these," she said, "if only to prove to yourself that today wasn't luck." He hesitated, then nodded, placing the notebook gently into his bag. Hours later, Emmett found himself in the tutoring center, sitting alone in a small, dim room, with a single fluorescent light buzzing overhead. The campus outside was quiet. Soft footsteps from janitorial staff echoed in distant hallways. The tutoring room smelled faintly of whiteboard cleaner and old textbooks. He opened the blue notebook slowly, handling it like something fragile. Inside were dense equations, sketches of graphs, and notes written in Whitaker's sharp, slanted handwriting. The complexity was beyond anything the syllabus covered. These weren't problems for students. These were challenges meant to intimidate, maybe even discourage. He flipped to one of the pages marked with a star. "This one nearly stumped Whitaker," Chloe had said earlier. "He told me only a true mathematician would ever crack it." Emmett studied the problem, a multi-layered constraint optimization task with embedded nonlinear terms. The kind of problem someone would brag about solving in a graduate seminar. He began working. Minutes turned into an hour into 2. His hand ached from writing, but he kept going. Every misstep became a new attempt. Every successful transformation reinforced his momentum. He didn't hear the door open. He didn't notice the faint gasp from someone standing by the threshold. He was locked in, his mind sharper than it had been all day. He stepped back from the whiteboard, just after midnight, chest rising and falling with controlled breath. The board was covered in a complete solution, logically constructed, meticulously simplified, and elegantly finished with a boxed final answer. He exhaled for the first time in minutes. Behind him, someone whispered, "You solved it." Emmett spun around. Chloe stood in the doorway, her eyes wide, not in pity, not in shock, but in awe. She stepped inside slowly, her gaze scanning the board. That isn't possible. This problem took Whitaker months. She stopped, shaking her head. "Do you realize what this means?" Emmett didn't know what to say. He wasn't sure what it meant. He only knew that for the first time since arriving at Hadley University, he felt a spark of belonging, not because the school accepted him, but because the math accepted him. Chloe took a small step closer. "Emmett, if anyone finds out you solved this, it won't stay quiet." He frowned. "Why not?" She hesitated. "Because Whitaker guards these problems like his legacy depends on them." Emmett's heartbeat picked up. Something in her expression shifted, concern turning into fear. "Emmett," she whispered, If he finds out you can solve problems he never published, he won't react well. At all. Before he could respond, she added, and someone else just saw you do it. Emmett froze. In the quiet tutoring room, a shadow moved outside the door. Someone had witnessed everything, and they weren't supposed to. Chloe Vance had tutored dozens of students in her 3 years at Hadley, but nothing she had seen, not from prodigies, not from protégés of senators, compared to what she witnessed that night in the tutoring room. She hadn't meant to spy. She had doubled back to retrieve her phone charger and saw the light on under the door. When she peeked in expecting a janitor or late-night crammer, what she saw stopped her cold. Emmett Walker stood in front of the whiteboard, entirely in sync with the equations unfolding under his chalk. His body moved with the rhythm of problem-solving. No hesitation, no second-guessing. His lips moved softly as he worked, whispering transformations, calculating partials in real time like a composer conducting an orchestra only he could hear. Chloe recognized the problem. Page 1112 of Whitaker's Hidden Journal. A complex, constraint-layered calculus nightmare never published, never taught, and according to the professor only solvable by a mind of rare caliber. He used it as bait, a trap for students who claimed to be ahead of the curve. Emmett wasn't supposed to even know it existed. She stood there in quiet disbelief, her mind racing. Every step was precise. His transitions were fluid. It wasn't just right, it was beautiful. For a moment she forgot he was a freshman from a town she had to Google on a map. In that room, Emmett wasn't a scholarship statistic or a target of ridicule. He was a mathematician revealing art through numbers. And then, he solved it. He stepped back from the board like someone slowly exhaling after carrying a heavy weight. The answer sat boxed in the bottom right corner. Chloe felt the air shift in the room. He looked different now. Not confident, but cleanly and irreversibly capable. It took everything in her not to blurt out what she'd just seen. Instead, she walked in and softly said, "You solved it." Emmett had turned, startled, his eyes a mix of fatigue and humility. Not a trace of arrogance, just quiet pride. They didn't speak much after that. She warned him it might cause trouble, that Whitaker was possessive of his challenges. Emmett, still unsure of how big this moment really was, simply nodded and packed his notebook. Chloe stayed behind. She opened her bag, removed Whitaker's journal, her personal copy made last semester when she had earned the professor's trust, and laid it beside the whiteboard. Page 1112 stared back at her. Identical problem. She took out her phone to document it. Proof mattered at Hadley, especially when truth was inconvenient. She left the tutoring room minutes later, journal on the desk. She didn't realize someone had been watching. Early morning sunlight bled through the leaded windows of the math sciences building. Students filed in, dragging backpacks, yawning into coffee cups. Chloe arrived early, slipping into the back of the lecture hall, ready to pull Emmett aside before class began. But when she entered, her stomach dropped. On the board, already half filled, was the exact problem from last night. Not just the layout, the phrasing, the symbols, even Emmett's shorthand bracket styles, distinct and unmistakable, appeared on the board. She blinked twice. No, it couldn't be. Dr. Whitaker stood before the room in a crisply pressed gray suit, his tie a quiet navy. He tapped the board with his marker. "This," he announced, "is a derivation I've been perfecting for some time. It will serve as today's challenge. I expect none of you to get it right the first time, but it's good exposure to higher-level thinking." Chloe's lips parted slightly. Emmett walked in seconds later. His eyes landed on the board, and he froze. He stopped mid-step. His mouth tightened. He stared at the equation the way someone might stare at their own reflection in a stranger's house. He knew every line, every curve. It was his. Chloe leaned forward, whispering as he slid into the chair beside her. "That's your solution," she murmured. "Exactly." Emmett didn't reply. His jaw clenched. The truth hit harder than a slap. The problem he solved in silence was now being paraded in front of the class, credited to the same man who had laughed at him days earlier. He couldn't breathe. Chloe opened her notebook, flipping quickly. Page 112. The timestamp on her phone matched. The documentation was real, but someone else had taken the notes, had either copied them or taken the journal outright. And now Whitaker was claiming the credit. How did he get it? Emmett whispered. "I left it on the desk last night," Chloe admitted, guilt flooding her face. "I was going to lock it up after you left, but I forgot." Emmett didn't say anything. Whitaker clapped his hands. Now let's break it down. He turned to the board and began walking through the steps, each one mirroring Emmett's sequence from the night before. The class watched in silent admiration. Some students nodded as though comprehending brilliance. Others jotted notes furiously, hoping to trace the professor's genius. No one knew. No one but Emmett. And Chloe. And whoever had taken the journal. After class, Emmett waited for most of the students to leave before approaching the desk. Whitaker turned slowly, a pleasant smile pasted on his face. "Mr. Walker," he said, "something on your mind?" Emmett studied him for a long moment. The urge to confront him outright clawed at his chest. But he knew better. No one would believe his word over a tenured, celebrated white professor. Especially not the kid from a rural black town who everyone assumed was there by accident. "You ever think about where your ideas come from?" Emmett asked quietly. Whitaker chuckled, eyes gleaming with something colder than intellect. "Of course, but I wouldn't expect you to understand original research. Maybe someday." Emmett nodded slowly. "Maybe." Then he walked away. Chloe met him outside, her face pale. "I'm so sorry, Emmett. I didn't think—" "It's not your fault," he said, voice flat. "It's mine." She blinked. "Why?" "I trusted this place to play fair," he said. For the first time since arriving, Emmett didn't feel frustrated. He felt dangerous. Back in the dorms, Emmett opened his father's old notebook, the one he brought from home, filled with scribbles, mechanical equations, and rustic calculus problems written in pencil. He flipped through until he found it, a nearly identical constraint optimization problem, but applied to irrigation flow mechanics. His father, a self-taught engineer, had solved a version of this same problem 15 years ago, without any formal degree. Emmett had modernized the math last week. That was the problem Whitaker had now claimed as his own. The pieces fell into place like weights dropping onto his shoulders. This wasn't just theft. This was erasure. And it wasn't just academic. It was personal. Emmett had solved something from a lineage of overlooked genius, and it had been whitewashed in real time. But Chloe wasn't done yet. That night, she reviewed security footage from the tutoring center, requesting access under the guise of missing personal items. She watched the grainy black and white footage fast forward through the night, and there it was. At 12:40, a figure entered the tutoring room after Emmett and Chloe had left. Not Whitaker, someone smaller, slender, quick. She froze the frame. It was another student, a junior in the department. Tyler Cohen.
One of Whitaker's favorites.
She gasped. His face lit up as he picked up the journal, flipped through it, and then tucked it into his coat. Chloe's hands trembled as she hit print on the still image, proof that Tyler had stolen the notebook, and possibly delivered it directly to Whitaker. The applause hit Emmett like a slow-motion collapse. As Dr. Whitaker capped the dry erase marker and stepped back from the board, smiling with that rehearsed humility only master manipulators possess, the room erupted with claps. Some students looked impressed, others looked confused, as if wondering how the professor had once again pulled a rabbit out of a theorem. But Emmett, he couldn't move. He sat rooted in his chair, eyes pinned to the formula stretching across the whiteboard. Every mark, every transition, every final boxed solution was identical, line for line to what he had worked out in the tutoring room. His work, his discovery, his hours of calculation and intuition, his lineage of thinking, built on his father's dirt-smudged notes and years of underdog grinding, now stolen. Chloe sat beside him, visibly shaken, her mouth parted in disbelief, eyes flicking between Emmett and the front of the room. She leaned toward him, whispering, "He's presenting it as his own." Emmett didn't respond. His silence wasn't empty. It was storm-thick. He was holding back something volatile, rage, disbelief, and shame colliding beneath the surface like a furnace sealed too tightly. As the students packed their bags and filtered out of the room, conversations buzzed around him. "That was wild. How does Whitaker even think like that?" "I recorded it. I'm sending it to my brother. He's doing grad school at MIT. He'll freak. He didn't even use notes. Just wrote it from scratch." Emmett didn't correct them, because who would believe him? Chloe pulled his sleeve gently. "We need to tell someone. We have the time-stamped footage from tutoring last night. We have the printout of Tyler stealing the journal. That's enough, right?" He turned to her, his voice flat. "Enough for who?" She blinked. "The dean? The ethics board?" He gave her a look, the kind that carried centuries of learned caution. You think anyone's going to take the word of a black kid on scholarship from Alabama over a tenured white professor with 5 awards and a building named after his uncle? Her face fell. But it's plagiarism. We have evidence. And I'm a freshman, he said, with a public school diploma and boots that still have dirt on them. Silence stretched between them like a bridge neither dared cross. Chloe wanted to argue. She wanted to scream, but she'd been at Hadley long enough to know how this place worked. Whispers became warnings. Warnings became black marks. Careers were ended quietly in the name of institutional integrity. And when she went to her advisor, a mild-mannered associate professor known for his neutrality, he confirmed it. I'm saying this as a friend, he told her gently. Accusing someone like Whitaker, without a peer-reviewed case, without formal channels, it could derail your position here. He's protected. Chloe swallowed hard. Even if the claim is true. He didn't answer. That silence was the answer. By the end of the week, Emmett's name was once again circling campus. But not with applause. Did you hear? The student muttered outside the cafeteria. He was bragging about solving some crazy problem, and then Whitaker solved it on his own in class. Yeah, I heard he took Chloe's notes and tried to pass them off as his. Another added. I heard Whitaker was testing him. Gave him the problem on purpose just to see if he'd cheat. The irony was suffocating. Chloe tried to push back online, posting anonymously in student forums, attempting to shift the narrative. But every time she shared something factual, it was met with waves of doubt, ridicule, or outright attacks. One reply stuck out. He's a charity admit. What did you expect? That's what happens when you lower the bar. Another, letting unqualified students in hurts everyone. Now they want credit for doing average work? It was like watching a wildfire spread in slow motion, and being forced to inhale the smoke, breath after breath. Emmett stopped going to the cafeteria. He ate granola bars in his dorm room. He skipped group study sessions, avoided the library, and took the long route to class through the back alleys of campus. Every hallway seemed colder now. Every glance felt like a dare. Even the professors had changed. One offered him a remedial packet to catch up. Another asked pointedly if he was finding the pace too advanced. The calculus he once loved now felt like a language stolen mid-sentence. But the worst came when Dean Carver summoned him to her office. She was composed, polite, but her smile was too tight. Mr. Walker, she began, folding her hands over a printed report. There have been rumors, claims made by students, even a few tutors regarding a supposed misattribution of work. Emmett said nothing. She continued. Let me be clear, we take integrity very seriously. But unless there's a formal complaint, with signatures and the matter is pursued through the ethics committee, it will not be investigated. Understand? He nodded. She paused, voice softening slightly. I know this transition hasn't been easy. Culture shock, social pressure. But I want you to know we support our scholarship recipients fully. You don't need to overextend yourself to prove anything. He stared at her. There it was again. That smile. That tone. That veiled, gutting condescension. He left her office with a pit in his stomach. On the way out he passed Tyler Cohen's smug, sipping coffee in the faculty lounge, deep in conversation with Dr. Whitaker. They both glanced up. Tyler winked. That night, Emmett sat alone in his dorm room, fingers pressed against his temple. He stared at his father's old journal, the one that still smelled faintly of engine grease and oak. He flipped through it again and again, searching not just for solutions, but for something deeper, something ancestral. He came to a page where his father had scribbled, "Sometimes truth don't shout, it just waits." The words hit harder than any formula ever could. His silence had been interpreted as surrender. But inside him, a storm was gathering. He hadn't come here to be liked. He came to win. Not with fists, not with fire, but with something stronger. Undeniable brilliance. The theft wouldn't be corrected in a complaint form. It needed to be exposed. In public. In a way so absolute, so raw, that even Whitaker wouldn't be able to laugh it off. Emmett pulled out a blank sheet of paper, and then another. He didn't know where this was going yet, but he knew how it would end on a stage, with eyes watching and no room left for silence. As he scribbled into the night, Chloe burst into his room, face pale, phone shaking in her hand. You need to see this. Now. The whisper reached Emmett through an unlikely source. An exhausted biology major from down the hall who'd stumbled into a conversation outside the math lounge. They said the exam changed, she told him quietly. Whitaker dropped half the syllabus and replaced it with a new format. only gave the heads up to certain students. Tyler, Caroline, and the rest of the golden crew. Emmett looked up from his notes. His brow furrowed, not with confusion, but with recognition. The kind of cold realization that tells you you've walked into a trap, and the walls are already closing in. It was the night before the calculus midterm. He rushed to check the class portal. Nothing. No updates, no changes announced. No mention of new rules, modified questions, or advanced topics. Everything looked identical on the surface. But that was the trick. Only Whitaker's favorites were notified. Word of mouth. Off-the-record meetings. Silent nods in the corridors. He was being iced out. By design. Chloe confirmed it hours later. She found him sitting in the library's lower level, hunched over textbooks that no longer applied. They shifted the whole exam. She whispered, glancing around. It's built off Whitaker's personal notes. Stuff he's never taught in lecture. They're expecting everyone else to bomb it, except the few he primed. Emmett didn't flinch. He closed the textbook slowly, then opened his father's journal. He ran his thumb across the cracked leather, as if the years of farm sweat and mechanical grease embedded in its pages could give him answers now. I'm not dropping out of this test, he said calmly. Chloe hesitated. Even if it's meant to fail you, he looked up at her, voice even. That's why I have to take it. The exam room the next morning buzzed with a low, uneasy tension. Some students looked relaxed, confident, smirking, lounging like they already knew the answers. Others flipped through pages of review notes that would be useless within minutes. Emmett sat near the back, not hiding, watching, studying faces, listening to conversations that weren't meant for him. Tyler leaned across the aisle to Caroline, whispering, Bet Walker wipes out today. Should have stuck to cornfields. She giggled. The exam booklets landed on desks with soft thuds. Dr. Whitaker walked the aisles like a warden doing final rounds before a lockdown. He stopped by Emmett's desk for a split second. Remember, he said smoothly, this test is designed to separate those who understand the math from those who memorize it. His words were dipped in condescension, but his smile was polished. Emmett met his gaze without blinking. The clock struck 10. Whitaker gave the signal, pages turned, and the war began. The first problem was foreign. A nested derivative structure built on a variation of a theorem never covered in lecture, only hinted at in passing during one office hour. Emmett hadn't been invited to. He stared at it, heartbeat thudding. Then he closed his eyes. He visualized the equations, not the ones from class, but the ones he used to scribble in the dirt behind his barn, solving fuel efficiency curves for tractors that should have been in a museum. He imagined chalkboards back in Alabama, barely clinging to the wall, where he taught himself gradients using YouTube and engine parts. This wasn't about calculus anymore. This was survival. He opened his eyes and started writing. Line after line, he broke down the abstract with raw logic and instinct. He worked in silence while the room shifted. Some students gave up halfway through. Others looked around in panic. Emmett didn't lift his head once. By the end of hour 2, his hand was cramping. Sweat beaded down his spine, but he was still going. Whitaker circled his desk more than once.
No encouragement.
No comment, just those eyes, studying him like a wild card that refused to fold. Emmett finished the last question, with minutes to spare. He checked his work twice, then walked his paper to the front, and laid it face down on the desk. Whitaker didn't say a word. Neither did Emmett. 2 days passed. No grade. No email. No feedback. Chloe refreshed the grade portal every hour. Students started receiving scores. C plus B. A for Tyler. Emmett's row was blank. She cornered a TA in the hallway. Where's Emmett's exam? The assistant looked uneasy. It wasn't in the stack. Chloe's eyes narrowed. What do you mean it wasn't in the stack? It didn't get submitted with the rest, the assistant muttered. Whitaker marked it as not received. Chloe's blood ran cold. That's impossible. I watched him turn it in. The assistant shook his head. I'm just telling you what I know. He's getting an incomplete. If it's not resolved by next week, it'll turn to a 0. Chloe didn't wait. She ran to Emmett's dorm. When she arrived, he was staring at his laptop, blank screen glowing, cursor blinking. They lost it, she said breathlessly. They're claiming your exam was never turned in. He looked up slowly. What? She nodded. Whitaker marked it. Not received. Emmett sat back in his chair. The silence between them cracked open with weight. I handed it in, he said. I walked it to his desk. I know, Chloe replied. I saw you, but there's no footage in that room. No cameras. His voice grew colder, and there were no witnesses. She closed the door softly behind her. They're erasing you. The whisper network kicked up again. Guess the math kid choked. He probably skipped the test and made up an excuse. I heard he left it blank. Too hard for someone from a school with no AP classes. Each rumor stabbed deeper. Chloe tried reporting it to the academic review board. But the system was a labyrinth. No physical proof. No paper trail. Whitaker had full control of the test submissions. He claimed it was never in his hand. Emmett's GPA slipped below scholarship renewal status. He received an automated email. Your academic standing is under review due to unsatisfactory performance metrics. But the worst was still to come. In the hallway after class, Tyler cornered him. Rough week, huh? He said casually. Maybe math's just not your thing. Emmett stared through him. Tyler smirked. Don't take it personally. Not everyone's built for this level. Then he leaned in. Maybe if you'd spent less time playing victim and more time studying, you wouldn't have forgotten to turn in your exam. Emmett didn't blink. He didn't speak. He just walked past. But something in him had snapped. Not broken. Snapped free. That night, Emmett sat with Chloe in a quiet corner of the library, surrounded by dusty shelves of journals and untouched math volumes. I'm done waiting for fairness, he said. She nodded. So what's the plan? I'm gonna give him a problem he can't steal. A solution he can't fake. A moment too public to deny. Chloe leaned forward. Like what? I want to solve one of his problems, Emmett said. Not just solve it live. In front of the department, with witnesses. Cameras. Press if I have to. Chloe's eyes widened. That's dangerous. Only if I fail. She paused, then reached into her bag and pulled out a copy of Whitaker's unpublished journal. You'll need this. Emmett looked at it, then at her. No, he said. I won't. He started building his own problem. Not Whitaker's.
Not his father's.
Something new. Something unbreakable. Something brilliant. He worked through the night, constructing layers of complexity that mirrored both textbook tradition and rural logic. He applied techniques learned fixing broken combine harvesters and merged them with multi-dimensional calculus. It was a language only he could write. Only he could translate. He would not beat Whitaker at his own game. He would change the game entirely. The next morning, Emmett opened his email and saw an invitation to speak during the university's annual math symposium, sent by a faculty member he didn't know and copied to Dr. Whitaker. By the time Chloe reached the math department's administrative office, her pulse was racing. The secretary behind the desk, an older woman with soft gray curls and a brittle smile, barely looked up as Chloe approached. I need to speak to someone about a missing exam, Chloe said, trying to keep her voice measured. The woman blinked slowly. If you're talking about the Calculus 2 midterm, Professor Whitaker already submitted grades. That's the problem, Chloe said, her tone sharpening. One of the students turned in his paper. I saw it. He walked it to the desk. But now it's marked as missing. The woman tilted her head, unimpressed. Do you have proof? Chloe hesitated. I was in the room. I watched it happen. Unfortunately, the woman said, returning to her computer. The professor reported that Emmett Walker's exam was never received. Unless there's documentation, we have no reason to question that. Chloe's jaw tensed. So that's it? A student's academic future gets derailed, and all you have is his word against Whitaker's? The woman didn't reply. That silence, the institution's favorite response, was louder than any denial. Meanwhile, Emmett sat on the edge of his dorm bed, reading the official email over and over. Final grade. Incomplete, 0 pending. GPA recalculated. 3.41. Warning. Scholarship eligibility review in progress. The screen blurred as his vision brimmed. It wasn't the number that broke him. It was what it represented. The weight of effort undone by invisible ink. 1,000 hours of studying, rewriting, preparing, and showing up. Now erased by a man who didn't believe he belonged here in the first place. Outside, campus carried on. Students rushed between buildings, rehearsing lines for plays, scheduling study groups, sipping iced coffee with the confidence of those who'd never been told their brilliance was borrowed. Inside Emmett's room, everything slowed. Even time felt cruel. Chloe barged in minutes later, face flushed, voice tight. They're not doing anything, she said. They said there's no documentation, no formal complaint, and Whitaker submitted his final records already. It's done. Emmett didn't look up. She continued. You're not the first. I dug through old department files, quiet cases, dismissed grievances. There are other students, mostly from underrepresented backgrounds. Papers lost, grades mysteriously lowered, credibility questioned after one disagreement. He raised his eyes finally. How many? He asked. At least 6 I found from the last 5 years, she said. All black or Latino. All forced out quietly. He nodded once, eyes flat. They're going to make it look like you failed because you couldn't handle the pressure, she whispered. They'll never say it was rigged. Emmett exhaled slowly, that tired kind of breath that feels older than it should be. They don't have to say it, he replied. They'll just let it happen. The consequences moved quickly. His scholarship was flagged for non-renewal. A formal letter arrived from the financial aid office, listing his academic underperformance and noting that appeals could take 6 to 8 weeks long after the semester's deadlines. Suddenly, Emmett was expected to pay nearly $18,000 out of pocket to stay enrolled. He had $32.16 in his bank account. The rest of campus didn't know or didn't care. The cafeteria was full. Student government was planning a winter gala, and in one of the graduate lounges, a chalkboard read, Academic integrity matters. Keep Hadley's standards high. Whitaker's words. The slogan came from a departmental memo he'd circulated that week calling for a return to foundational excellence. A thinly veiled campaign to reduce non-traditional admits, coded as anything outside the polished prep school elite. Chloe showed Emmett the flyer. Do you see what he's doing? She said. He's not just covering his tracks. He's weaponizing what happened to you. Emmett didn't respond immediately. His eyes were on the flyer, but his mind was somewhere deeper, somewhere between memory and rage. This isn't new, he finally said. What isn't? This, he repeated. My dad used to say there's 2 kinds of racism. The kind that spits in your face, and the kind that smiles while stepping on your neck. Emmett started walking the campus differently. Slower, quieter. Not avoiding people. Just invisible now. Friends stopped texting. Professors stopped making eye contact. Even the staff in the cafeteria gave him those pitying half-smiles, as if they'd already decided his story had ended, and he was just clinging to the final page. He'd become a ghost at Hadley, someone who had almost made it, someone who had once showed promise, someone they were already forgetting. But in the edges of that silence, something else was forming. Not outrage, not protests, whispers. It began in a study group after hours, a conversation between 2 black engineering students. Then a freshman journalism major overheard them and joined in. Then a political science major who'd had her grade inexplicably changed by another professor. A group started forming. They didn't call themselves a club. They didn't register with the school. They met in unused classrooms. Late at night, lights low, doors closed. Some were students of color. Some were first-generation scholars. All had stories, microaggressions, targeted grading, rumors weaponized against them, institutional gaslighting passed off as rigor. And one name came up more than any other. Whitaker. Chloe joined the 3rd meeting. She brought files.
Emails, notes, screenshots, discrepancies in grading patterns across 5 semesters.
They sat in stunned silence as she laid it all out. Emmett wasn't there that night. He didn't know the fire had started. Back in his dorm, Emmett stood by the window, watching frost bloom along the edges of the glass. He hadn't spoken to his parents in a week. He didn't know how to tell them everything they'd sacrificed for might vanish. Not because he wasn't smart enough, but because he didn't look like he belonged at the front of the classroom. He was still holding the rejection letter when Chloe texted, "You need to log into the forum." Now, he opened his laptop, heart thudding. Hadley's student forum wasn't public. It was invite only, moderated, censored. But that night, someone bypassed it. Right at the top of the homepage, in bold white letters on a black banner, was a new post. Title, "We're exposing Whitaker." Underneath was a list. Anonymous user handles, timestamps, snippets of accusations, misgraded exams, targeted failures, racist jokes overheard in his office. A voice recording with a date, 2 years old, of Whitaker saying, "You start letting in kids from farms and inner cities. Next thing you know, they'll be running the math department." Chloe had posted it. The room around Emmett seemed to vanish. The words glowed on his screen, burning through the layers of shame, silence, and fear. He wasn't alone. He never had been. He had just been waiting for the moment others could see it. Outside in the same building where Whitaker once taught Emmett's first lecture, another group gathered quietly. Students of color, allies, and the first professor bold enough to break ranks.
They weren't angry anymore.
They were organizing. They weren't whispering. They were preparing. As Emmett scrolled, a message popped up in the thread. Anonymous, but clear. Town Hall. Tomorrow, noon. Bring proof. The forum post didn't just go viral. It detonated. What began as a single bold message, where exposing Whitaker, became the matchstick that lit a long, dry forest of hidden injustices. Within 12 hours, the anonymous campus forum had quadrupled in traffic. By morning, more than 24 accounts, previously dormant or disguised, posted stories that bore a chilling resemblance to Emmett's. Some were recent. Others were buried years deep. All were students of color. One sophomore wrote about a paper mysteriously downgraded after challenging a grading rubric. A recent alum described how Whitaker laughed when she mentioned applying to graduate school, telling her she'd do better in social work. Another student, who had dropped out after freshman year, revealed an email thread where Whitaker described her as a misfit from a disadvantaged pipeline experiment. Chloe read every post. Her hands trembled as she refreshed the thread again and again, each new message making her stomach twist tighter. There was too much symmetry, too many patterns, too many silenced voices that had finally found breath in anonymity. And all of them pointed to one man, Dr. Ronald Whitaker. The next ripple came from outside campus. An independent student-run podcast called Hadley Unfiltered picked up the story. It was typically focused on campus politics, parties, and pop culture, but this time, it had found something real. In their latest episode, titled Legacy and Lies, The Whitaker Files, a former student named Aiden Monroe came forward publicly. Aiden had dropped out his junior year from the same mathematics program. His voice cracked as he recalled long hours of being ignored, his requests for office hour help denied, his research plagiarized and rebranded by Whitaker as a department-wide collaboration. I tried to fight it, Aiden said on air. I filed complaints, but the moment I did, my references vanished. My rec letters never got written. I lost my funding. I lost everything. The episode was shared over 3,000 times in under 24 hours. It wasn't just about Emmett anymore. It was about a culture of gatekeeping, exclusion, and untraceable sabotage, all dressed in academic excellence. And finally, the university noticed. The development office issued a quiet statement. In light of recent events, some alumni donations are being temporarily reevaluated. That was all it took. Suddenly the storm wasn't just ideological. It was financial. Money talked. Even Whitaker's defenders now spoke in hushed tones. Board members called emergency meetings. PR consultants were brought in. The university's official Twitter account turned off replies for the first time in its history. But still, no action, no suspension, no investigation. Dr. Ronald Whitaker remained untouched. Still lecturing, still smiling, still untouchable. And that silence, that is what made the whispers turn into thunder. In the middle of this chaos, Emmett sat alone in the campus chapel. Not to pray, to think. It was the only building on campus that felt older than the racism that lived in its walls. The stone pews carried a kind of quiet that reminded him of his grandfather's porch. The only place back home where his thoughts didn't feel like burdens. He clutched the notebook in his lap, the one his father had given him before he left for Hadley. He hadn't opened it in weeks, not since the midterm fallout. His fingers moved across the leather cover as if remembering each callus his father's hands left behind. He opened it slowly. Most of the pages were filled with equations scribbled over diesel maintenance logs, notes from conversations with mechanics, diagrams of water flow systems mapped beside fertilizer ratio. But deeper in the notebook were pages Emmett had never fully examined. Not until now. There, hidden in the margins of an oil-stained page, was something else. A full derivation. Not Whitaker's, not Chloe's, not anything from a syllabus. It was his father's original solution to a complex calculus optimization, applied not to a classroom theory, but to crop rotation systems. It mirrored the exact problem Whitaker had stolen, only dated 10 years prior. Emmett's hands started to shake. It wasn't just proof of plagiarism. It was evidence that the very theory Whitaker had claimed as his own legacy was built on knowledge that had already lived, uncredited, unacknowledged, and undocumented, in black Southern ingenuity. In his father's mind, in Emmett's blood. That night, he met Chloe under the arch outside Whitaker Hall. She saw the expression on his face before he said a word. "You found something," she whispered. He handed her the notebook. She flipped through it, slowing when she reached the marked page. Her breath caught. This is the original," she murmured. "Emmett, this predates everything." "He built it out of necessity," Emmett said. "He wasn't solving it for grades. He was solving it because he needed a way to make the soil more efficient with less water." Chloe looked up at him, tears welling. "This isn't just proof. This is erasure." "No," Emmett said softly. "This is legacy." Word spread fast. Chloe posted anonymized snippets on the forum, time-stamped, and side by side with Whitaker's journal entries. The resemblance was undeniable. Then someone, an anonymous ally from the student union, leaked Whitaker's email signature from a recent conference submission. Derivational structures in applied optimization, claimed solely under his name. The abstract, nearly identical to Emmett's father's problem. Now it wasn't just manipulation. It was academic theft, cultural appropriation under the guise of genius. A storm hit campus like nothing Hadley had seen in decades. Students gathered outside the administration building with signs that read, "Whose math is it anyway? Stop stealing black brilliance. Legacy made genius." Local reporters showed up. Cameras rolled. The president of the university issued a vague statement about integrity and ongoing reviews. Still Whitaker remained silent. Still, he kept his position. Emmett watched from a distance. He didn't want headlines. He wanted truth. He wanted acknowledgement. Not for himself. For his father. For every forgotten black mind that had been left in footnotes or erased entirely. Later that night, Chloe called.
"You need to see this," she said.
She sent him a link. It was a faculty letter circulating quietly behind the scenes. A petition. 27 professors had signed it, calling for Whitaker's immediate suspension pending investigation. For the first time, his colleagues weren't protecting him. For the first time, the legacy had cracked. But Emmett wasn't done. He looked at the notebook again and traced the faded lines of his father's handwriting. Then he pulled out a blank page. He began writing, not a complaint, not an accusation, a proposal. To solve the problem again. Leave. Unfiltered. Unstealable. A demonstration too transparent to erase. As he finalized the draft, a knock sounded at his door. A student stood there, when he didn't know, holding a small envelope, and whispering, "You don't know me, but they're going to try to stop you. Whitaker's people, you need to be ready." The notebook had always been there. Heavy, weathered, stitched at the spine with thick thread. Its corners bent from year of being shuffled between toolboxes, pickup truck glove compartments, and kitchen drawers. Emmett had carried it to Hadley more out of nostalgia than necessity. He didn't know it would become the map back to the truth. He sat on the edge of his bed, the door still slightly ajar from the mysterious visit minutes earlier. The envelope that student handed him, still sealed, rested on his desk. But for now, he couldn't tear his eyes from the journal. It smelled like oil and cedar, and its cover bore faint stains that told the story of a man who'd learned the hardest math under the harshest conditions. No whiteboards, no software, just instinct and repetition. Emmett opened it to the first page. His father's name, John R. Walker, was scrawled across the top corner in black ink, followed by a hand-drawn schematic of a grain irrigation system. Beneath that, numbers danced across the page. No structure, just free-form equations like music playing without bars. But it wasn't until halfway through the book that Emmett stopped breathing. There it was, a derivation. Merely line for line, not in the language of academia, not dressed in polished notation or abstract theorizing, but stripped to its essence, a solution built from necessity, function over form. The problem mirrored the one Whitaker had stolen. A constraint optimization scenario, but instead of abstract variables, it used water flow ratios, pipe capacities, and seasonal variables. It was the same math, but older, years older. Emmett flipped the page. Another solution. This one tied to fuel combustion in older diesel tractors. Again, the structure of the math resembled Whitaker's unpublished challenges. Solutions Emmett had thought were above his level, crafted by Ivy League minds, but they had lived here first, in this journal. Written by a man with no formal degree. A man who taught himself calculus under a hanging porch light, with a tattered copy of Principles of Engineering and a second-hand TI-84 from a pawn shop. A black man, in rural Alabama, who had been told since he was 15 that brilliance didn't run in his blood. And now Emmett realized why Whitaker's problems had always felt familiar. They were familiar. They were home. Chloe stared at the pages, sitting beside him hours later, her eyes scanning each formula with mounting disbelief. This isn't just similar, she whispered. It's foundational. Whitaker's work. It's built on this. Emmett nodded slowly. And this notebook? She asked. Where did he even get it? My dad gave it to me the night before I left for Hadley, Emmett said. Said I might find something useful in it one day. Chloe looked up, tears threatening. Your father was part of a defunct engineering program, right? Emmett nodded. Tuskegee, the agricultural mechanics division. It got shut down before he could finish. Do you think Whitaker got access to their archives? Emmett's voice dropped to a whisper. I think he didn't need to. My dad told me once. There was a grad student who visited the farm back in the day, some kind of volunteer program. He used to take photos of Dad's chalkboard work, said it was interesting, said he wanted to use it for reference in his own research. Chloe's eyes widened. Do you remember the name? Emmett stared at the wall for a long moment, then said, Ronald Whitaker. The name landed between them like thunder. Chloe reached for her laptop and pulled up the faculty archives. Whitaker's dissertation, submitted nearly 23 years earlier, was available in the digital repository. She opened it. Her mouth dropped. The first section, the entire opening theorem, was a polished academic version of what John R. Walker had written in pencil on page 47 of the notebook. Only the variables had changed. The soul of the math had not.
This is stolen legacy, Chloe whispered. Decades of credit, reputation, academic prestige, built on something he didn't even understand at the time.
Emmett leaned back, gripping the journal tightly. It wasn't just about stealing my exam, he said. This wasn't about a grade, or a midterm. No, Chloe said, voice shaking. It's about erasure, long before you got here. The next morning, Emmett walked through campus carrying the notebook like it was sacred scripture. Students still stared, still whispered, but the looks were different now. A mix of curiosity, fear, and admiration. The anonymous posts hadn't stopped. If anything, they multiplied. Screenshots of Whitaker's past grading discrepancies. Archived syllabi compared to his private problem sets. Even side-by-side images of Emmett's whiteboard derivations and Whitaker's lecture notes. Every piece told the same story. A long con of theft dressed as mentorship, institutional power used to cloak intellectual exploitation. Still, Emmett knew, evidence wasn't enough. Not here. At Hadley, proof didn't always matter. Not unless it came with performance. So he'd give them one. He emailed the student forum moderator with a simple request. I want to solve something. Publicly. Unedited. I want every student and faculty member in attendance. The reply came within the hour. We'll get the room. You bring the truth. Emmett smiled. Then turned to the sealed envelope the student had given him the night before. He opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed, precise. It was a list of students, those who had filed complaints against Whitaker and were silenced. Black, brown, female, queer. Next to each name, a date, a course, a quote from office hour notes. And then, at the bottom, one final line. You're not the first, Emmett, but you could be the last. No signature, no sender, just truth. The night before the event, Emmett returned to the notebook. He sat at the same wooden desk where he'd first started building his own solutions weeks ago. This time he wasn't working on a protest. He was building a legacy. One Whitaker couldn't plagiarize. One the university couldn't suppress. He pulled from his father's problems, modernized them, added complexity, layered new concepts, all fused with the kind of raw, necessity-born thinking that academia never taught but always envied. He constructed a multi-phase equation, solvable only by someone who understood both worlds, the soil and the symbols. He titled it in the corner, The Walker Derivation. As Chloe looked over his shoulder, watching the final lines appear, she whispered, You're going to change everything, you know. He paused, then said softly, No, I'm just putting the truth where everyone can see it. As Emmett packed his materials for the next day's public challenge, a university-wide email pinged on every student and faculty inbox. The administration is aware of planned events. Attendance may result in disciplinary review. The university's Mathematics in Motion lecture series was usually an uneventful affair. A stage for safe topics, new algorithms, guest PhDs, and roundtables with low stakes. Faculty liked it because it maintained the image of collaboration without actual disruption. This time it was different. The hall was over capacity before the doors even opened. Students lined the walls, others sitting cross-legged in the aisles. Phones were out. Live stream links floated through group chats like wildfire. Faculty members filled the back rows with their arms crossed, some curious, others clearly annoyed. Chloe stood near the side aisle, her phone angled low, quietly recording. At exactly 3:01 p.m., Emmett Walker walked to the front of the hall. He didn't wear a suit. He didn't have slides. Just a notebook tucked under his arm and a marker in his hand. Dr. Ronald Whitaker, seated in the corner of the panelist table, wore a smug, bemused expression, arms folded, legs crossed, like he was watching an overambitious student step into a pool too deep for his weight. Emmett turned toward the chalkboard, not the digital screen, and without a word began writing. The room fell into silence. He wrote slowly, deliberately. Not showy, not rushed, just controlled. First, he laid out the base variables. Then he built the constraints, a structure of multivariable relationships that hinted at both abstract calculus and real-world logic. By the 5th line, some faculty members were whispering. By the 10th, one professor had pulled out a notepad. Whitaker's smile started to fade. Emmett didn't look back. His hands moved with the confidence of someone who wasn't performing. He was revealing. The problem he wrote wasn't pulled from any Hadley curriculum, but to those watching closely, it looked eerily familiar. It was Whitaker's infamous unsolvable derivation, one he'd presented 3 years ago, at an international symposium, claiming it as a personal breakthrough, a problem he had never published a solution to, keeping it as a display of brilliance he alone could navigate. But Emmett wasn't copying it. He was reconstructing it from memory. And not only that, he was improving it. As he reached the 12th line, he paused, then turned to the audience. This, Emmett said, voice steady, is a derivation first presented as unsolvable. It was cited as the foundation of a modern approach to constrained optimization. I'm going to solve it now. Fully. Publicly. Gasps echoed. Students sat upright. Phones tilted. The live stream viewer count soared past 2. Whitaker's face twitched. He leaned forward, finally breaking his silence. I hope you understand the seriousness of what you're implying, he said, his voice clipped. Emmett met his eyes for a brief second. I understand it better than anyone, he replied. Then he turned back to the board and began solving. Every line felt like a hammer to the facade Whitaker had built. Emmett didn't miss a beat. Each transformation, each integration step, each algebraic simplification, flawless. He moved with rhythm, weaving the logic like thread into cloth. The solution wasn't just accurate, it was elegant, beyond what even some professors had expected. By the time he reached the boxed answer at the end, a wave of stunned silence washed over the room. For a moment, no one spoke. Then a student in the back let out a quiet, damn. Others nodded. Some clapped. Whitaker stood. I recognize this problem, he said slowly. It was presented at a conference under my name. If this is rehearsed, if this has been leaked, it will not count as original work. Chloe stepped forward then, holding up a second notebook. Emmett's father's, unless, she said firmly, it was solved decades ago, by someone Dr. Whitaker never credited. Gasp. Whitaker froze. Emmett took the notebook, opened it to the page, and placed it beneath the document projector. The entire audience saw the faded equations, written in pencil, dated, signed John R. Walker, matching Emmett's derivation step for step. One professor stood abruptly. Another whispered, "Is that the original?" A voice from the front row asked, "How long has this been hidden?" And for the first time since arriving at Hadley, Emmett wasn't being watched with suspicion. He was being seen with clarity. The university couldn't ignore it now. Within 48 hours, a formal inquiry was launched. An independent committee, including external ethics investigators, was formed. Whitaker was placed on temporary leave. The math department issued a brief statement affirming its commitment to academic integrity and racial equity. News outlets picked up the story. The live stream had been clipped, shared, translated into 3 languages, and featured on a popular educational podcast. Emmett Walker's name was everywhere. But recognition didn't quiet the storm. It only shifted it. 2 days after the chalkboard showdown, Chloe found her car tires slashed in the faculty parking lot. An anonymous email landed in Emmett's inbox. You embarrassed the wrong people. Enjoy the fallout. And then the twist neither of them saw coming. A leak. A private file posted on a student forum, scans of Emmett's midterm answers, supposedly showing inconsistencies, implying he hadn't solved the problems alone. The scans were doctored, subtly but enough to raise questions among students who didn't know better. Suddenly, rumors resurfaced. What if he's not as smart as he looks? Chloe's probably been helping him the whole time. Maybe his dad wrote the solution, and he's just claiming it now. Chloe slammed her laptop shut after reading the threads. They're trying to discredit you before the inquiry concludes. Emmett didn't speak. He sat motionless in the dorm, staring at the old journal, thinking of how many others had been buried before they even had a chance to be doubted. He wasn't surprised, but it still hurt. They don't want truth, he said finally. They want control. Chloe looked at him. Then what do we do now? Emmett stood. We take control back. The next morning, Emmett received a letter slid under his door, not from the university, but from Whitaker's lawyer. Inside, a cease and desist, accusing Emmett of intellectual property theft. The backlash came quietly at first, like a slow fog rolling in. Then it hit with full force. 3 nights after the chalkboard showdown, Emmett returned to his dorm to find the door defaced. Slashed across it in red spray paint were the words, "Know your place." Inside, his mattress had been flipped, his notebooks scattered, and a cracked Sharpie scribbled across his desk, "Not your school, not your math." He didn't call campus security. He already knew the outcome. They'd take a statement, jot notes, nod solemnly, then file it under unverified. Just like the others. Just like every quiet assault wrapped in plausible deniability. Instead, Emmett cleaned his room in silence. He didn't cry. He didn't rage. He just moved slower, like someone dragging an invisible weight. Chloe wasn't spared either. Days later, she was called into the Office of Faculty Affairs and handed a letter. She had been placed on temporary academic suspension. The charge? Violation of professional boundaries and breach of faculty trust. No hearing. No warning. She was escorted off campus before she could even collect her office keys. The real reason wasn't written on paper, but it hung in the air. She had helped Emmett, and in doing so, she had become a liability. When she called him that night, her voice was dry. "I was naive," she said. "I thought truth would be enough." Emmett didn't say anything at first. Then, softly, "I'm sorry." She laughed bitterly. "Don't be. I'd do it again." He whispered, "Me too." Then came the letter. It arrived in a thin white envelope with no return address, slid under his door just before dawn. Emmett opened it and unfolded the single page, typed, cold, unmistakable in its message. "You have a choice. Leave quietly and transfer, or we forward your scholarship file to the Board of Financial Aid for irregularities. We know your tax documents weren't filed correctly. You'll be disqualified, and your debt will double. There will be no appeal. Think carefully." There was no signature. But the timing wasn't coincidence. The university had started flexing its muscle. The veneer of progress had peeled. Now it was raw control. The message was clear: disappear, or be destroyed. Emmett took the letter to Chloe, who had since moved into a friend's off-campus apartment. She read it twice, eyes narrowing. "This is extortion," she whispered. "We need to go public." Emmett shook his head. "They'll deny everything. Say I fabricated it." She leaned in. "Then let's not fight this alone." Word of the letter began to leak, first through anonymous tips to student journalists, then in cryptic tweets by alumni who still had eyes inside the administration. One tweet read, "If you knew what Hadley does to protect its own, you'd stop donating. Ask about the letter." Within days, a group of alumni, mostly graduates of color, reached out to Emmett. Some were lawyers, others professors, one a former Hadley trustee. They pooled resources, offered legal aid, and hired an independent investigator. National media began circling, hungry for interviews. Documentaries were pitched. News anchors requested statements. A black journalist from a major network sent a personal email. "We want to tell your story right." But the university remained silent. No interviews. No press briefings. Only internal memos reminding staff to avoid external commentary. Meanwhile, the board met quietly behind closed doors, chaired by men who had once praised Whitaker for upholding Hadley's academic excellence. Men who had invited him to dinners, endowed his research, shielded his ego like it was tradition. These were not neutral observers. They were gatekeepers. Emmett could feel the walls shifting, but he refused to back down. Each morning he walked to class with his father's journal tucked into his bag. He attended lectures as if nothing had happened. He submitted homework, took quizzes, nodded respectfully to professors who avoided his gaze. He didn't break. Not even when he saw Tyler Cohen smirking across the hallway, or when other students whispered, "Why doesn't he just transfer?" Because this was never just about him. It was about the long silence, the years, the names, the voices buried beneath Whitaker's legacy. And he was done being buried. Then on a rainy Thursday afternoon, an email landed in his inbox. The subject line was simple: former faculty, request to meet. The sender, Dr. Leonard A. Graves. Emmett paused. He had never heard the name before. He opened the message. Emmett, I've been following what's happening from a distance. I retired from Hadley 10 years ago. I was the first black professor hired in the Department of Applied Mathematics. I was also the first to be quietly pushed out. I have something I need to show you. Something I should have revealed a long time ago. Meet me tomorrow, off campus. I'll explain everything. Dr. Graves. Emmett read it twice, then 3 times. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, unsure of what to say. Eventually he typed, "I'll be there." They met at a quiet park 2 miles off campus. Dr. Leonard Graves was in his 70s, dressed sharply in a wool overcoat, despite the drizzle. His hair was silver, his gait slow but assured. When he saw Emmett, he extended a hand. "I knew your father," he said. Emmett blinked. "You? What?" Graves nodded. "I was at Tuskegee. I worked with John Walker on a joint research initiative back in the day. We weren't allowed to publish under our own names. Funding was pulled before we could finish, but I never forgot him." He reached into his satchel and pulled out a folder. Inside was a faded manuscript, co-written, dated. On the bottom corner, John R. Walker and L.A. Graves. It was titled, "Field-Based Models for Multivariable System Constraints in Low-Resource Agriculture." Emmett stared at it. He couldn't speak. Graves continued. "Whitaker interned under a professor who had access to this. I have reason to believe he saw it, borrowed it, and never gave it back. That's when his original work began to surface. Why didn't you say anything?" Emmett finally asked. Graves looked out over the wet grass. "I tried," he said, "but they buried it. And I was tired. Too tired to fight. But watching you, you reminded me what it means to stand." He turned to Emmett. "I kept the original. Signed, dated, credible. If this goes public, his entire academic career collapses." Emmett took the folder slowly. It felt heavier than any textbook he'd ever carried. That night, Chloe stared at the manuscript with wide eyes. "This is it," she said. "Not just plagiarism. This is theft of historical record." Emmett looked down at the names on the page. His father's, Graves's, his own future finally rooted in truth. "I'm not stopping," he said. She nodded. "Then neither am I." The next morning, a university-wide announcement lit up every inbox. Emergency town hall scheduled. Attendance mandatory. Administrative findings to be shared. And beneath it, a personal note slipped under Emmett's door. "Speak now, and your future burns with his." The night before the town hall, the campus felt like it was holding its breath. Emails buzzed with speculation. Students texted in hushed, coded tones. Faculty whispered in the corridors, unsure which side of history they'd be standing on when the sun came up. Emmett sat alone in the library's back corner, not studying but staring at the manila folder Dr. Graves had handed him, and the anonymous threat left under his door. "Speak now, and your future burns with his." It didn't matter anymore. His future wasn't a transaction. It was testimony. And it wasn't his future at stake. It was the truth. While Emmett read and reread the manuscript from his father's work, across campus, another man was digging into older archives. Dr. Leonard Hayes hadn't set foot on Hadley's campus in years. Retired now, he lived in Baltimore, but he still kept his teaching files, the ones he'd quietly saved after his final semester, when he realized the department was not only broken, but hostile. He once taught alongside Ronald Whitaker. Back then, Hayes had seen the signs. Whitaker's uncanny ability to anticipate breakthroughs, his knack for writing nearly identical research to unpublished projects. But at the time, Hayes was warned, "Don't make trouble. You're lucky to be here." So he said nothing. Until now. Hayes opened a thick manila envelope, labeled Fall Archive 2002, and pulled out a document he hadn't touched in 2 decades. It was a departmental evaluation report, never published, never officially acknowledged. The report tracked a disturbing pattern. Multiple theorems Whitaker had submitted for review in the early 2000s bore strong resemblance to independent study projects written by students of color from a now defunded STEM outreach program. The conclusions had been flagged, but the report had been buried. Hayes had kept a copy, just in case that case had arrived. The next morning, an email pinged in 3 inboxes simultaneously. Emmett Walker, Chloe Vance, tips@campusbeacon.org, the student-run news blog. Subject: Academic misconduct evidence. Confidential. From L. Hayes. Attached a 24-page report titled Parallels in Theorem Structure, a review of overlap in student research and faculty publications, 1998-2000. Page 7 included a chart. 3 columns. Column 1. Title of student papers from the STEM Bridge program. Column 2. Date of submission. Column 3. Whitaker's later publications. 12 pairs. 12 near matches. 6 of the students had since left academia. 4 had dropped out. 2 had tried to publish. Both were rejected, reportedly due to lack of originality. Chloe called Emmett, her voice breathless. "This changes everything." Emmett said nothing. He was already printing the report. The town hall was packed before the chancellor arrived. Students jammed into the auditorium, spilling into stairwells and windowsills. Faculty sat in the front rows, expressions unreadable. Administrators lined the sides of the stage. Whitaker was there too, sitting stiffly in a tailored navy suit, his jaw tight, his smile forced. He had not resigned, and the university, even now, had not forced him. The air was thick with the unspoken. This was no longer a disagreement. It was a reckoning. At the podium, the vice provost cleared her throat. "Today we address recent allegations concerning academic integrity, institutional bias, and matters that challenge the foundation of Hadley's scholarly values." The crowd buzzed. Whispers filled the space between syllables. Emmett stood near the back, Chloe beside him. She held her phone steady, recording. Emmett held nothing. He didn't need notes. He had memory, evidence, and pain. The kind of pain that doesn't tremble. It sharpens. Midway through the town hall, a moderator opened the floor for questions. A few faculty spoke first, measured, cautious, political. Then a student stood. "Will the university acknowledge that students of color have been disproportionately targeted by institutional systems designed to silence dissent?" Murmurs. Another student followed. "Will Dr. Whitaker address the fact that his most celebrated theorems mirror the unpublished work of students who never had the chance to defend themselves?" Gasps. The moderator stammered. "We encourage respectful questions." Chloe nudged Emmett. "It's time." He walked to the aisles slowly, the room shifting as he moved, like water parting for something too real to deny. He reached the front microphone and looked directly at Whitaker. "I have a question," Emmett said, voice calm. "Not just for the board, for the community, for history." Whitaker didn't move. Emmett held up the printed report. 24 pages. Documented parallels between your early work and projects written by minority students. Students who had no funding, no publication access, no protection. He paused. "Why do so many of your original breakthroughs resemble research by those who were never credited?" Whitaker's jaw clenched. The crowd leaned in. "I have proof," Emmett said. "From your colleagues, from archives, from my own family." He held up his father's notebook. "This isn't about a midterm or a grade. It's about the theft of genius from people you thought would never rise high enough to be heard." The auditorium went silent. Whitaker stood suddenly. "I will not respond to unfounded accusations from a student whose academic standing has been under review." He turned to the chancellor. "If Hadley has no intention of protecting faculty from slander, then perhaps it's time to reconsider who defines this institution's standards." He stepped away from the panel. Chloe whispered, "He's walking." Emmett stepped forward again. "I'm not finished." The moderator looked panicked. "Sir, please." Emmett raised his voice. "You've all seen the videos. You've read the threads. You've watched the live stream. But you haven't asked the most important question." He looked across the sea of faces. "What does it mean when brilliance is only recognized once it's whitewashed?" A hush swept the room, and then something unexpected. A professor stood, not one of Emmett's allies, not one of his mentors. It was Dr. Agnieszka Bellamy, an old guard statistician who rarely spoke publicly, and never against faculty. She cleared her throat. "I reviewed the report," she said. "The parallels are not theoretical. They are exact. Word for word, line by line. This is not coincidence. It is exploitation. Whitaker stopped in his tracks. The crowd turned. Then another voice. And another. Dr. Hayes appeared at the back entrance of the auditorium. Escorted by 2 alumni, he raised a folder. For the record, he said loudly, I submitted this evidence to the Ethics Board in 2004. It was ignored. We will not be ignored again.
Whitaker's face drained of color.
The town hall descended into a storm of statements, questions, accusations, and open confessions. Former students stood and shared stories. Faculty whispered, visibly shaken. Trustees took notes. Reporters scribbled. And for the first time since the scandal began, the institution looked exposed, not as an innocent bystander, but as a silent accomplice. By the end of the event, the chancellor was forced to step forward. We are suspending Dr. Whitaker from all university duties, effective immediately. A third-party academic ethics panel will conduct an open review. All findings will be public. The words echoed. But Emmett didn't feel relief. Not yet. Because the war wasn't over. It had only just begun. That night, Emmett returned to his room to find a sealed letter waiting. Inside, an invitation to speak before the Board of Trustees, and a warning from a faculty insider scribbled on the back. They're not done. He's preparing to countersue. Get a lawyer. Fast. It wasn't just a meeting. It was a reckoning. By the time Emmett arrived at Sanders Hall, the line of attendees wrapped around the block. News vans idled at the curb, satellites spinning. Protest signs bobbed above heads. Some read, Truth has no tenure. Others said, We are all Emmett Walker. Chloe sat beside him in the front row, her eyes scanning the crowd. There were students of every background, some there for support, others just for the spectacle, but the weight of what was coming made everyone hold their breath. On stage, the university board sat stiffly behind a long table, their faces carefully blank. The president sat at the center, flanked by 2 attorneys. To the right, Ronald Whitaker entered, dressed in a dark tailored suit. He looked smaller than usual, the lines on his face more pronounced, the confidence in his gait slightly off-tempo. This was not the man who laughed at students in lecture halls. This was a man cornered by truth. He adjusted the microphone with trembling fingers. But before he could speak, the president leaned forward. This hearing is now in session, she announced, her voice flat. All remarks will be recorded. The subject of this inquiry is academic misconduct, ethical violations, and discriminatory behavior by a tenured faculty member. The room was silent, but the air buzzed like electricity before a lightning strike. Whitaker cleared his throat. I want to begin by stating unequivocally these accusations are misrepresentations, personal vendettas, misunderstandings taken out of context. I've dedicated my life to this institution and have always upheld the highest standards. He looked out into the crowd. Academic competition breeds tension. But plagiarism, racism, these are dangerous words being used without merit. From the audience, a few heads nodded. But most remained still. Then came the questions. One by one, board members took turns reading from documents, emails, course evaluations, and disciplinary patterns. The tone was cold, clinical. They cited student testimonies. They referenced years of complaints. They mentioned the overlapping theorems and the now public report from Dr. Hayes. And Whitaker deflected them all. I can't be responsible for what students imagine. I never saw those drafts. Coincidences happen in mathematics. Logic leads to convergence. It was the same performance he had given for decades. Until Emmett stood, he hadn't been scheduled to speak. But when the president asked if any students wished to address the panel, the entire room turned to him. Emmett rose slowly, the weight of hundreds of eyes falling on his shoulders. He stepped up to the podium. No notes, no paper, just the folder under his arm and the notebook in his heart. He looked directly at Whitaker. You laughed when I solved your problem, he began, voice steady. You smiled when they cut my scholarship. You stayed silent when I was threatened, harassed, and erased. He turned to the board. I am not here for revenge. I'm here for restoration. He laid the folder open on the table in front of him. Inside are time-stamped derivations from my father's journal, solutions that predate Dr. Whitaker's publications by over a decade. Attached are witness statements, comparisons by academic reviewers, and the original manuscript co-written by Dr. Leonard Graves, proving Whitaker's work was not only derivative, it was stolen. A murmur spread through the room. Emmett continued. He built his legacy on buried brilliance, brilliance that came from poor black students, from uncredited engineers, from people no one expected to speak up. He paused, then added, "Until now." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the camera stopped clicking. Then a board member, a woman in her late 60s with short silver hair, leaned into her mic. "I've reviewed the evidence. I've seen the documents. I've heard enough." She looked down the table. "I motion that we call for Dr. Whitaker's resignation. Effective immediately." Shock rippled. The board president blinked. "Dr. Monroe, we haven't." "I'm not finished," the woman cut in. "This institution cannot pretend to uphold integrity while protecting its own from accountability." Several other members exchanged glances. One nodded, then another. Whitaker stood, face flushed. "This is outrageous. You're gonna let a student smear my name, my career, with no legal due process?" The president leaned forward. "Dr. Whitaker, this is an academic inquiry, not a courtroom." "I'll sue," he spat. "Defamation, retaliation, discrimination against me." Chloe whispered, "Here it comes." Emmett said nothing. He didn't need to, because Chloe reached into her bag and handed the board president a small flash drive. "This," she said, "is the final piece." The president hesitated. "Play it," Chloe urged. "It's from a departmental mixer. Someone recorded it, not knowing it would matter later. But it does." A faculty aide plugged it into the computer. The sound system buzzed. Then Whitaker's voice filled the hall. "You know how it is. You let in one of those cornfield kids. Next thing you know, they're trying to prove calculus is in their DNA. I say let them solve tractors, not tensors." Laughter followed. Other voices. Some tried to sound uncomfortable, but none objected. The room at the town hall froze. Every breath held. Every jaw locked. Whitaker's face turned to stone. A moment later, the recording ended. Silence lingered like smoke after a fire. The board president spoke next. "Dr. Whitaker, the board hereby votes to terminate your tenure, remove you from all faculty positions, and bar you from university-funded research effective immediately. Your actions have not only violated academic ethics, they have disgraced this institution's values." Applause erupted. Not wild, but righteous, clean. For the first time in the room's long history, justice didn't feel theoretical. It felt real. Whitaker didn't speak again. He turned and walked out. Emmett sat back down, exhaling slowly. Chloe reached over and squeezed his hand. "You did it," she whispered. But Emmett didn't smile, because even as the crowd buzzed with celebration, and reporters shouted questions, and board members shook his hand, he knew the truth. This wasn't over. The board had expelled Whitaker, but Hadley was still Hadley, and Emmett's record still carried an incomplete. His scholarship hadn't been reinstated. His name hadn't been cleared officially. He was no longer invisible, but he was still in limbo. That night he returned to his dorm. Outside, someone had written "Truth lives here" in chalk on the sidewalk. Inside, waiting on his bed, was a certified letter from the Board of Trustees. He opened it slowly. Inside was a summons, an invitation to appear at a special session to determine ongoing eligibility and assess continued presence at Hadley University. It wasn't a celebration. It was a review. He wasn't done proving himself. He was still on trial, and as he closed the envelope, Chloe called, her voice tense. "You need to see who they just put on your review panel." "It's not over, Emmett. They just stacked it with Whitaker's former allies." The fall leaves had changed by the time the headlines faded. Whitaker was gone. His office cleared. His name removed from the seminar series. Even the framed portrait in the math hall had quietly vanished overnight. But Emmett Walker's world was far from repaired. Vindication didn't fix broken grades. Applause didn't refill his scholarship account. Injustice, when delayed this long, came with residue, invisible but everywhere. He returned to class, not as a student, but as a symbol. Some professors tiptoed around him. Others overcompensated, tossing hollow praise his way like confetti. But the students, they made their own calculations. Some still stared with admiration. Others with disdain. And the rest? They simply avoided him. He had become something inconvenient. Not because he was wrong, but because he reminded them how easily the whole system could fracture. His GPA was still under the minimum for scholarship renewal. The midterm Whitaker had lost remained an incomplete on his transcript. Despite the public fallout, the administration moved at a snail's pace, shrouded in bureaucracy. The review panel scheduled to hear his academic appeal was stacked with faculty loyal to the old guard. Chloe, now reinstated, represented him in the hearing. She stood firm before the panel of stony faces. The exam was submitted. The grade was tampered with. He was set up to fail. One professor scoffed. You're asking us to overturn procedure based on, what? Social pressure? A media frenzy? No, Chloe snapped. I'm asking you to correct a deliberate injustice with direct evidence and honor your own integrity. She placed the time-stamped footage of Emmett's exam submission on the table. The same footage that had been mysteriously unavailable during the initial grading cycle. One board member cleared his throat. We'll review the documents and submit a recommendation. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no. And for Emmett, that was enough to keep going. Outside the building, students had gathered with signs once again, but fewer this time. Public support had waned as finals approached. Outrage was temporary. GPA stress was permanent. Emmett stood by the railing, watching the sunlight cut across the quad. Chloe joined him, arms crossed. They're still stalling, she muttered. I know, he said quietly. You could sue. I could, he replied. But I'd rather graduate. Chloe glanced at him, then smiled faintly. You're still aiming for the top? He nodded. I didn't come this far to sit quietly in the back. Support came from unexpected places. A retired alumnus, a black engineer who'd been following the story in silence, reached out with a handwritten letter and a cashier's check large enough to cover the rest of Emmett's year. Your fight reminded me of mine. The note read, I couldn't save my own scholarship back in 1974. I want to make sure you don't have to leave the way I did. Chloe cried when she read it. Emmett didn't. He simply folded the letter, placed it in his notebook, and went straight back to work. But the ghosts lingered. In group projects, students waited for him to take over. When he asked questions in class, some rolled their eyes. He overheard someone in the hallway. He's just a media darling now. A martyr with math notes. Another muttered, he got in through scandal. Must be nice. There were no racial slurs. Just coded words. Dog whistles in polite tone. Enough to remind him that justice doesn't erase envy. And truth doesn't cancel resentment. But Emmett didn't flinch. He showed up to every lecture. He turned in every assignment early. He started spending late nights in the tutoring center again. Not being tutored, but tutoring others. Quietly. Without fanfare. Word spread. Freshmen started dropping by with questions. Students who'd once avoided him now lingered longer after he explained problems. They began to see what Chloe saw months ago, that Emmett didn't just understand math. He felt it, and he could make you feel it too. He wasn't trying to fix his reputation anymore. He was rebuilding something stronger. One evening, Emmett found himself staring at an application on his screen. It was for a summer internship, the most prestigious one in the country for applied mathematics and systems engineering. Only 5 students were selected each year. 2 from Ivy League schools. 3 from a rotating pool of candidates nominated by faculty. The stipend was generous. The mentorships legendary. The committee included scholars, CEOs, and former Hadley faculty. Emmett paused before typing. He scrolled down the list of reviewers, and there it was. Tyler Cohen, now listed as a junior board advisor. Underneath, another familiar name, Professor Lillian Maris, Whitaker's closest former ally and his co-author from 2 papers now under ethics review. Emmett closed his eyes. The fight was about to start all over again. Chloe knocked on his door later that night. I heard, she said simply. Emmett nodded. I still applied, he said. If I don't make it, fine. But they won't get to decide where I stop. She grinned. Damn right. He handed her his statement of purpose. Tell me if it sounds like begging. She read it silently. Then said, no. It sounds like someone they can't ignore. A week later, the email arrived. Subject: your interview has been scheduled. Summer Systems Initiative Program. Emmett sat motionless, staring at the screen. Interview, not rejection. He clicked open the message. Dear Mr. Walker, we've reviewed your application, and despite ongoing internal debate regarding current circumstances, we believe your mathematical profile warrants a conversation. You are invited to participate in a live problem-solving interview panel next Thursday at 9. Panelists will include Dr. Lillian Maris, Mr. Tyler Cohen, Ms. Sarah Kim, Dr. Andrew Roth. Emmett's hand tightened into a fist. It wasn't an interview. It was a trial. Chloe sat across from him at the coffee shop, reading the panel list. They know exactly what they're doing, she muttered. I know, he replied.
They're hoping you crack.
I won't. Chloe studied him. You sure? He looked up. I didn't survive Whitaker just to flinch in front of his shadows. That night, Emmett returned to the same desk where he solved Whitaker's unsolvable problem. He pulled out the notebook again. Not his father's, his own. He began sketching ideas, not to impress the panel, but to remember who he was. Not a media darling, not a symbol, not a threat, a mathematician, built from dust, diesel, and decimals. Raised not to seek permission, but to create truth no one could erase. As he closed the notebook, his email pinged again, a private message from Sarah Kim, one of the panelists. It read, "Just a heads up, 2 of them plan to trap you. Not with the math, with politics. Be ready." The panel room was suffused with the quiet hum of expectation. Long glass walls framed high-rise city streets beyond. A dozen seats filled with men and women in crisp business attire, not casual scholars, an arena, not a classroom. And at its center sat Emporium Systems, the firm behind the forefront of applied mathematical modeling, recruiting only the elite. Emmett Walker entered carrying nothing but a laptop under one arm, and the same notebook his father had handed him months earlier in the other. He passed the panel's front row, noticing nods of approval from 2 Ivy League grads wearing tailored suits. Then he took the chair directly opposite the panelists at the polished mahogany table. The panel chair, Dr. Lillian Maris, cleared her throat. "Mr. Walker, welcome. We understand you applied under unique circumstances. We appreciate your interest in our Summer Systems Initiative program." She skimmed his resume. "Before we begin the technical portion, we'd like to explore your background. You've had public attention recently." Emmett held his gaze steady. "Yes, ma'am. Because I believe the work behind the attention matters." Another panelist, Mr. Tyler Cohen, leaned forward. He had a casual grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Some might say you've become a symbol media darling, as one post put it. How do we know you're not just riding the wave, rather than leading it?" Emmett's jaw tightened imperceptibly. "Symbols fade. The model I built doesn't." There was a moment of silence. The panelists exchanged glances. Miss Sarah Kim spoke then. "We're curious, your application states you've developed a live simulation model based on multivariate optimization problems. That's impressive, but given your current academic standing, we wonder, how do we trust the integrity behind the numbers?" He leaned forward. "Integrity is not a score, it's process. I created this model from the ground up. I used theoretical bases from my father's work, and combined real-world field data. I'll show you now if you like." Dr. Maris nodded curtly. "Please proceed." Emmett opened his laptop and projected the simulation model onto the large screen in front of them. The room hushed. The model began with a complex terrain grid, morphing into water flow subsystems, constraints shifting dynamically, optimization curves sliding like live wires. The simulation ran in real time. "Notice," Emmett said, voice steady, "as constraints tighten, the system adjusts soil moisture, nutrient distribution, fuel cycles, variables that speak to both agricultural mechanics and abstract calculus." The panelists' pens paused over their notes. One by one they leaned in. Mr. Cohen frowned. "This looks a lot like one of Dr. Whitaker's published frameworks." Emmett nodded. "Because it follows the same structure. I derived it using legacy formulas. Yes, but I added the field dimension. My father solved it in the dirt. I solved it in the cloud." A murmur ran through the panel. Ms. Kim spoke. "Are you saying you used Dr. Whitaker's framework as a base?" "No," Emmett replied quietly. "I'm saying he used my father's framework as a base. I built on truth." He tapped his notebook. "I did not inherit it. I translated." Silence stretched. The model continued to run. The screens displayed output curves that matched actual empirical data Emmett had collected over 2 summers back home. Dr. Maris finally said, "In all my years, I've never seen a candidate pivot mid-interview to deliver this level of demonstration." The head engineer on the panel, Dr. Andrew Roth, nodded. "Let's step out of the abstract for a moment. Your GPA is below our usual target. Your transcript shows incomplete work, debate involvement, public controversy. We must ask, is your application more about optics or outcome?" Emmett exhaled quietly. "I think outcomes matter more. I don't control the narrative. I control the model." Dr. Roth circled back. "Very well. We'll run the final phase now. A live challenge. You will be given a system problem we haven't shown candidates before. You'll model it on site in real time." Emmett's eyes sharpened. "Ready when you are." They brought him a sealed folder. He nodded, opened it. The problem described a hybrid energy soil crop system, with constraints overlapping harvest cycles and fuel burn rates. It was strong, more advanced than most senior interns. Emmett snapped open his father's notebook beside him. He didn't copy it. He referenced it. His screen filled with code. His fingers moved fast. The simulation adapted. The panelists watched, some skeptical. After 40 minutes, he hit execute, and the model produced an optimal solution within seconds. He turned to them. Output ready. You saw the constraints, the adjustments, the empirical match. Dr. Maris blinked. She rose and said, "Panel, I believe this performance speaks for itself." Applause, soft but genuine, filled the room. Dr. Roth stood. "Mr. Walker, you've just outperformed every Ivy graduate candidate we've seen this year. Congratulations. We'd like to make you an offer." For a brief moment, Emmett allowed himself a quiet nod. But then he looked back at the faces around him. Mr. Cohen's smile was tight. Miss Kim looked relieved. Dr. Maris composed. He realized the panel wasn't just offering him a job. They were admitting to something.
That he had won.
Then it hit him. He wasn't being hired. He was being evaluated by the darkest critics of his journey. And they had just admitted to it. After the interview, Emmett left the building under a sky thick with dusk. Chloe met him at the entrance. Her arms wrapped around him without words. His shoulders slumped, not with defeat, but release. "You did it?" she said. "We did it," he replied. She nodded. "So what now?" He stopped walking. "Now I accept the offer. But on my terms." Chloe raised an eyebrow. "Meaning, I'll go. But I won't be silent. I won't be grateful. I'll deliver results. And I'll make sure the world knows where it began." She smiled. Proud. That night, Emmett received the formal offer letter. It was elegant, with signatures and start dates. Relocation packages. He read the tone carefully. No mention of his recent battle. No reference to the broader scandal. Just business. He closed it. Set it aside, looked at his father's notebook, and thought about how he'd built this from the ground up. And how this job could be a platform, not just employment. He missed the quiet nights back home, the tractor hum, the porch chalkboard. But he didn't regret leaving, because he wasn't leaving. He was ascending. He spent the rest of the week packing. His dorm roommate helped. Chloe stayed late with him in the common area. They laughed quietly, made plans, office visits, research labs. His father back in Alabama watching via FaceTime, tears in his eye. The University Review Board's decision still hung over him. Enrollment pending, scholarship appeal pending. But for one night, he celebrated. He didn't call it victory. He called it the next chapter. The next morning, at 8:03 a.m., Emmett's phone rang. It was an unknown number. He answered. A calm voice said, "Mr. Walker, welcome to Emporium System. Before we proceed with your onboarding, there's one final question. Are you prepared to sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding any past institutional dispute?" Years after the storm, when the glare of news cameras had finally dimmed and most campus signage had quietly changed, Emmett Walker's name no longer carried a question. It carried possibility. He had built something unexpected, not just survival, but transformation. And as he looked out over the skyline of his new headquarters in the heart of an emerging tech corridor, he remembered the cracked chalkboard in his Alabama farmhouse, the one where he'd learned to sketch out his first derivative while mechanics repaired a broken tractor behind him. He founded Walker Systems and Analytics, a research firm that fused theoretical calculus with real-world engineering. The company's glass lobby stretched upward, tinted by sunset and ambition. But inside, the DNA of humble beginnings remained. The walls bore framed pages from his father's notebook, the engine grease stains still visible in the margins, a reminder of where brilliance sometimes begins. Emmett insisted on it, because he knew the world might forget. He'd make sure they remember. By now, he led dozens of underrepresented students, Black, Latino, first-generation scholars, through scholarship programs his firm funded. Many of them had arrived timid, uncertain, afraid to ask questions. He had once been in that chair. He walked them through the complex equations he had built. Yes, but he also showed them something rarer, the space to belong, the room to fail, the right to rewrite the rules. Chloe Vance, his former TA and ally through the scandal, ran the Education Outreach Division. She traveled to underfunded high schools, camped in rural towns, spoke to students who thought science was for someone else. Whenever she returned, she'd bring back fresh faces to Walker Systems. Young builders, dreamers, overlooked. Emmett watched her do it and felt a quiet pride, not because he had hired them, but because they recognized themselves in their own potential. One afternoon, They gathered at the unveiling of a mural on the wall of the math building at Hadley University. But it wasn't the portraits of campus founders anymore. Instead, a sweeping painting of Emmett standing at a chalkboard, marker in hand, equations behind him reaching past the board and into the sky. Beneath it, in bold script, originality comes from soil and silence. Students clustered, phones out, filming. Some older alumni whispered into their cuffs. Professors nodded. The legacy had shifted. Emmett stood before a small crowd, dressed in a sharp navy jacket, but his boots beneath the hem, still leather, still scuffed, hid a secret. The crowd applauded. He nodded, thanked them briefly. But when the moment passed, he drifted out the side door and stood alone in the quiet corridor. He touched the mural's edge. He remembered the first time he solved that problem in the lecture hall. The laughter, the doubt, the theft. And he whispered to himself, "We are here now." He thought about his hometown, Elkmont, Alabama, the farm, the dusty boots, the old schoolhouse with peeling paint where he learned long division. He never returned permanently. But every month, a check went back home. He'd rebuilt the schoolhouse, new roof, new computers, new chalkboards, so that some other kid, who looked like he once did, could take up the marker and rewrite the future. It wasn't charity, it was investment. In roots, in resilience. The firm had grown, projects streaming in from agriculture, energy systems, AI models. His team developed an AI framework that leaned heavily on the same optimization structures his father had outlined and Whitaker had stolen. Only this time, the datasets included diverse geographies, under-resourced regions, curricular redesigns. The inference layers learned to value field-based data over legacy prestige. Emmett had turned stolen theory into liberated practice. One evening, in the boardroom of his company, Emmett and Chloe looked out large windows as the city lights blinked awake. Chloe turned. "They're calling it the Walker architecture in AI circles." He exhaled. "Because it has to be. Because when the next generation builds, they shouldn't have to ask permission." She smiled. "You changed the narrative." He looked down at his boots. "We changed the narrative." But even as the company prospered, Emmett felt a familiar tension. The world he had entered, the tech industry, wasn't immune to the systems he had escaped. Old power structures still lurked behind code. Algorithmic bias, corporate hierarchies, hidden assumptions. He reminded his team often, just because you break one barrier doesn't mean the rest fall automatically. Then came the twist. At the annual gala celebrating his company's 5th year, an internal memo was leaked. A prominent investor quietly paused funding, citing concerns about academic associations and recent institutional baggage. The board members were discreet. The message, even when you've already won, the game can reset. Emmett read the memo in a glass-walled office, his jaw tight. Chloe found him there, late, reviewing the numbers. "They're trying to drive us back to the shadows," she said. "Because you started from the shadows." He shook his head. "We'll keep moving forward." But inside he knew the work was never done. At home later that week, he closed his laptop and sat with his father's notebook beside him. His father's faded handwriting, the engine grease stains, the margin note in pencil. "Teach the math you know, even if they don't give you the board." Emmett traced those words with his finger and thought. What he really inherited wasn't the derivations. It was the right to be seen. He took out his phone and saw an email, subject Walker Legacy Fund. Call for applicants. He smiled, but then scrolled. The first application flooded in, a PDF from a student at a rural school. Scholarship request, handwritten essay, boots still muddy in the photo. He paused. The legacy was full circle. He called Chloe. "Look," he said softly, showing her the screen. She leaned in and read the application. "This is exactly why we started it," Chloe said. He nodded. "But they'll expect your story, your name, your fight." He turned away. "Then they can have it." The scholarship portal opened, and as Emmett pressed approve for the first round, a new message appeared. "Anonymous, untraceable, we were wrong about you. We want a private meeting." If you've ever been told you don't belong because of where you're from, the color of your skin, or how you speak, then you already know Emmett's story. It's not just his fight, it's ours. Because brilliance lives everywhere, but not opportunity. Type yes if you believe in justice. Subscribe if this broke your heart.